there is a lot of distance created because of perinatal loss or because of reproductive grief. And so when, again, getting back to the 4 pillars of connection, when people in partnership are not openly, authentically understanding each other and looking through each other's window, having empathy and accepting and validating those emotional experiences they have, then people are not close and connected. They are distant. And there is, again, a lot of resentment that builds, a lot of conflict that comes from that. I think it's hard for a lot of men to demand respect when you're not doing the work. I think when they come to realize that it's much harder than they expected, you don't have to wait for a crisis, and it doesn't mean there's a problem, and it doesn't mean that you're wrong or bad or crazy because you're asking for help. It'll punch you and chew you up and spit you out. If I could, I would have all my loved ones and people I've ever met and cared about in my life to have their own therapist. And everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a heart.
Yeah.
So you put your hand on your chest, as long as you got a heartbeat, you've got that reason to live, and you get one shot to live.
Matthew Braman, welcome to Dismantling You.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to what we talk through today.
You specialize in an area that often gets overlooked in men's mental health during the fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum journey. What led you specifically to focus on fathers?
Yeah, it's a bit rare to see people focusing on new dads in early fatherhood through pregnancy and postpartum. I had been expecting my first child with my wife, and we, at the same time, were moving, and I was moving from group practice to a solo practice journey. And so I had wanted to look around and think, how could I stand out in a saturated market? Where would I specialize, and who would I really try to, become the expert working with? And as I was looking around for support for moms in new motherhood, there was so much more visible support and not as much for dads. And so my practice, it's become, a bit of a passion project. And so I had a lot of experience working with boys, working with fathers and mothers through child and family therapy. And I thought at first, I'll work with therapy for men and new dads. Not long after I started my practice, I had met Postpartum Support International. So I started taking their trainings and really just doubled down into the paternal perinatal mental health direction. So that's now 5 years I've been working in my solo practice, and it's been really special to see the reaction I get when people find out that my services are even available.
And it's so interesting because when people think of perinatal mental health, they automatically assume mothers, and they rarely or sometimes forget about fathers. And that is a huge transition for fathers. Why do you think society has become more comfortable talking about maternal mental health, yet paternal mental health still remains largely invisible?
So, of course, rightfully, perinatal mental health care centers on the moms and the motherhood aspect of care and treatment and support. And by all means, it's still largely underrecognized, underreported, underfunded, undersupported. So there's a long way to go in supporting moms and motherhood, especially in pregnancy through postpartum and beyond. At the same time, many of those moms and women going through matrescence, they're partnered. And of course, when I think about my work with men and new dads and early fatherhood, I think it's just always important to remember that the birthing parent often has a partner, and those non-birthing parents, they may or may not be male identifying folks. That can also include adoptive parents or surrogate parents from LGBTQ communities, and certainly the gender identification of a non-birthing parent, it can be quite diverse. So in my experience, and most often who come to work with me, the experience they have, it's because they are most often recommended to me by their wife or their wife's therapist. And so it's not too often that many sort of the he, him non-birthing parents and fathers are searching for their own therapy. But what they may find is that their wife gets connected to care and support. And through that experience, the mother talking with her therapist, they think, maybe it would be a good idea to get some support for your husband or for your partner. And so I oftentimes talk with people about the perinatal mood disorders, mood and anxiety disorders that often show up with different presentations in men. But I think what we maybe need to focus and center in that perinatal care discussion is factoring in fathers and taking a whole family approach. That is a critical way for us making forward progress towards maternal health and wellness, infant health. The mental health experience of one parent often impacts the other. So if one partner's struggling, likely that both partners are struggling. And if we can maybe just kind of wrap our heads around that it's not a zero sum game, like focusing on fathers and new dad mental health should not and does not take away anything from maternal health and wellness and the need to, like I say, increase and elevate our attention and support for moms and new motherhood.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions that people have about men and emotional well-being?
Mm. Great question. I think for a lot of men themselves, they may have this kind of stereotype they've internalized that men don't feel their feelings, right? That everything gets shoved and stuffed down, that, real men get mad, for example. There's something called the man box. Have you ever heard of the man box
No. What
through
is it?
Tony Porter's work?
Mhm.
And he was a founder of A Call to Men. Um, they do a lot of public education and you know, programming around reducing violence against women, for example. They do lots of things, but Tony Porter, in his TED Talk, A Call to Men, he had discussed this concept that they had coined, and it's called the man box. So it's a set of rules and norms and expectations for how a man should act and how men should be. And so if people are violating those norms or rules, they're often criticized and ridiculed. They are supposed to be self-sufficient and to provide and protect and all, like I said, all these rules and norms of what a man should be. And so when they act outside of those norms, the gender status maybe is called into question. And in this idea of like precarious manhood that's fragile, vulnerable, it oftentimes must be proven socially when people are attacked and ridiculed and criticized for not being what a man should be. Then oftentimes they start to experience more anxiety, a sense of shame, and those sorts of internal experiences are externalized into more aggressive behaviors. So a lot of my work with men, I think, is trying to get them out of the head, right, and kind of their very logic brain oftentimes. And so I try to get them out of their head and work towards that journey to their heart. So I'm often working with emotion focused and kind of body based somatic approaches to therapy, so that they can start to recognize their humanity and how they feel emotionally. And, a lot of times the relational conflicts that we encounter in family life or just socially, it's often because we are not attuned emotionally with each other. So I think a lot of men have that stereotype that, if they start speaking or talking about their feelings, that they'll be judged, they'll be looked down on, and they'll be made to feel like they are less of a man.
Mhm.
So this certainly presents a lot of challenging factors that we always have to assess and look out for, like from the very first time we get connected with people.
Mhm. As a father, how has becoming a dad helped shape the way you understand
Mhm.
men and mental health?
Yeah, the psychologist Dan Singley, he owns a practice in San Diego called the Center for Men's Excellence, and he has a lot of training and does a lot of research around the men's work and men's mental health and the transition to fatherhood. He sits as a chair for the advisory board for Postpartum Support International. He facilitates a training for PSI. It's the Foundations on Paternal Perinatal Mental Health. Taking that training, being able to train with him and look at all the contributions he's made to the field, it's been really helpful to see how he speaks about and talks about like the fatherhood gap, where, a lot of modern millennial parents, especially the fathers, they're maybe expected to be more hands-on and more engaging or more involved with childcare and infant care, household tasks, especially compared to their maybe boomer father and, the boomer father generation and generations before them. So Dan Singley, he talks about, like I said, the fatherhood gap and how there's this inflection point where, as a sandwich generation member, you're now raising the next generation while maybe sometimes also taking care of the generation that came before you. You're looking at what was role modeled for you, maybe what you wanted to keep or what you want to maybe put to the side and maybe kind of adjust or modify or maybe even have to create for your own self. So as I became a father, I certainly connected myself to my own support. I started working with my own therapist, certainly having so many conversations with my wife about what we needed to expect from each other to make sure that we were on the same page and how we could meet those expectations. Certainly in my work, I see myself as the therapist, like the number one best tool in the room. So I bring myself to that work, and I think my lived experiences, there's maybe, of course, a time and place to judiciously share or self-disclose any personal lived experiences I have. But certainly I think a lot of people end up wanting to work with me because I've got my, like I say, lived experience becoming a new dad. And that inflection point for me was certainly like an experience of looking at the men in my family and how they treated themselves, how they treated each other people in the family, how they expressed emotions, how they contributed towards household care and responsibilities. Like I certainly feel blessed in my experience having some really good role models and showing me, what it means to uh, take care of yourself, but also take care of the people around you.
Mhm.
So yeah, I very much value the opportunity to work with men who are in that transition themselves and becoming dad for the first time and try to, you know, pay it forward in a sense and try to help them see and recognize the power that they have to influence and shape things for the better for themselves, for their partner and for their family, which my hope is that with many other people, that it has that ripple effect for communities and like society at large.
Absolutely. Now, when a couple is struggling with infertility, what emotional responses from
Hmm.
men often go overlooked?
Yeah. The number one experience that I hear men in my practice speak about, whether they're contributing factor or not, is that they are feeling like they're a failure. I mean, I think that's super relatable for a lot of women who are struggling to get pregnant or maintain pregnancy, and to deliver and kind of get to that milestone achievement of having a safe and healthy baby, right? Especially for the men, I see a lot of emasculation. They feel emasculated, like they're less than a man or not good enough, especially when it's male factor
Mhm.
infertility. That their sperm count may be low, or they think I'm supposed to have good swimmers by nature, and they find maybe some harsh reality through testing or through screenings and exams, and the uh, process can be very earth shattering as an attack on their ego. So trying to help people navigate that process, that certainly shows up in my work quite a lot.
Many men feel like they have to stay strong for their partners during fertility treatments. What are the dangers
Hmm.
of carrying that burden alone?
Well, there's a lot of real consequences, and it's very deeply interconnected and relational. So, for a lot of women, they may have their grief experience expressed more openly. The kind of grieving style might be characterized as like intuitive grief, where it comes maybe a bit more natural. It's certainly characterized as more feminine way of grieving, where they're more openly expressive and relational, connecting with others, talking about their grief experiences. With men, it's certainly a little bit different most often, but everyone experiences grief in their own ways, and it's so unique. And so, with maybe like a strong silent type of grief, whether that's actual loss in the form of death or non-death loss, maybe like say, for example, the loss of a uh, an opportunity or an identity or a vision. Um, what often happens is that the female partner, the mother, the birthing parent, they're expecting their partner to match their emotional expression, or if maybe a male partner, expecting father is not so openly emotional, the female partner tends to wonder, like, do you even care? Why doesn't this bother or impact you as much as it does me? And I think that's one thing that a lot of people tend to get wrong about male grief, is just because he's not crying doesn't mean that he doesn't care. But certainly I think there's a lot of that male training, and from a very early age, that men are the provider, the protector. They have to self-sacrifice. We have to, I certainly reflect on my own personal lived experience. My wife and I suffered a perinatal loss, and it was
I'm sorry.
very, of course, deeply painful and personal for us. And from all angles, people closely connected to me saying, you have to be strong for your wife. How's your wife doing? How's the mother doing? Right. Uh, I think just for a lot of women who are going through their own perinatal care, screenings, assessments, hospital systems, medical systems, outpatient care, everyone tends to ask how the mother's doing, rightfully so. And certainly, like I said earlier when we got started, not to take away anything from mothers, but they're often partnered. And because these experiences are so deeply interconnected and relational, I think it's something like 98% of fathers are not getting screened. They're not being asked how they're doing. They're maybe in the corner, kind of holding their arms, like folded up, and they're just kind of holding on to, like, protecting their own self, because maybe they don't want to cause any further emotional damage by showing their tears or by expressing their vulnerable emotions. So I think it's very challenging, especially when couples are going through any kind of reproductive grief or birth trauma or perinatal loss, that we try to just factor in fathers and understand that they also are human, and there's a lot of guarded armor that they're wearing and showing the rest of the outside world that we don't see underneath that. Um, they certainly experience anxiety and intrusive thoughts and guilt and self-blame, uh, on down the list towards depressive symptoms. They experience a lot of social isolation, and even in their friend groups and friendships, they find that it's too challenging for them to bring up and talk about with their buddies. So, a lot of people speak out platitudes, and, be strong is one of them, or be a man and handle it. Like, these sorts of messages, they may sometimes come from, or I'd say most often come from, a place of good intentions, but the impact they have, it's very psychological, very emotional, very relational, and it can be quite damaging.
Hmm. How can partners better support each other when fertility challenges affect them differently?
Mm. I wonder, have you ever heard of Dr. Clay Brigance?
Hmm.
He's a fertility mental health specialist out of St. Louis. He, I believe, is coming out with a new book focused on couples therapy with reproductive grief. And he's had some research where he's discovered that many couples will have a much more likely chance of staying together and staying connected when they can focus on what he describes as the 4 pillars of connection.
Hmm.
So that includes the emotional, maybe I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have it specifically locked in my memory bank, but it's the emotional expression, so that there can be equal opportunity or equitable opportunity for people in relationship to express their emotions back and forth with each other, to better understand each other. Beyond that, there's another pillar around managing conflict, and not so much the resolving conflict, but something like, say, for example, with Gottman method couples therapy, there's more of an emphasis on managing conflict than there is around resolving conflict. Just sort of the understanding that conflict is inevitable, and over time, we need to focus more on managing so that we're not like just kind of closing up conflict, tying a bow around it, and then it's all done. Like
Mhm.
maybe it ends up lingering, or there's residual effect or impact over time. So with Dr. Kleber-Gantz's 4 pillars of connection, again, we're talking about emotional expression, trying to make sure that that's open, authentic, honest, and certainly safe between partners to express emotionally. The management of conflict and how they navigate that tango dance. Beyond that, another pillar is trying to make sure that partners have a chance to grieve the loss of their shared hopes as parents. And then beyond that, certainly trying to find ways to enhance their intimacy with each other, whether or not that's sexual, but certainly emotionally connected through intimacy, which could be hand holding, could be cuddling, could be just sending that text in the middle of the day, checking in, hey, how are you? Just showing and demonstrating that closeness, that connection bond. Those 4 pillars really stick out to me when I hear uh, any couple going through some challenge, but especially for couples trying to navigate infertility, and especially maybe some waiting periods where things are so uncertain and there's high stakes, and maybe it's the last cohort of eggs,
Yes.
and they have maybe not a whole lot of chances to conceive after this opportunity that's in front of them in that present moment, while they're probably also not talking about it with anybody else. They're probably holding on to that, carrying it silently. So for couples to show up and really actually support each other in those times, it's so critical.
So, what signs tell you that a man is struggling emotionally during the fertility journey, even though he keeps
Hmm.
insisting that he's, quote, fine?
He's fine. Mm. I think of avoidance.
Mhm.
I think of avoidance coping is a common way of coping. It doesn't mean it's a healthy way of coping, but certainly like there's a lot of ego defense mechanisms that our brain is really good at trying to cope with stress, even though, like I say, it may not qualify as like a healthy coping style. Um, Avoidance often shows up in many different forms. Maybe that's um, you know dragging their feet to uh, make a decision on whether or not, yeah, we're, say, for example, going to accept this cohort of donor eggs, right? Like, say, for example, right? Like they may feel like the meeting or relationship check-in discussions interferes with some of their other things going on, like maybe their exercise routines, right? Like they might kind of avoid those more important discussions, or there could be things like process addictions. Maybe especially with men, could be showing up in the form of like sexual compulsive behavior, and maybe depending on porn and masturbation as a way of self-soothing. It could be gaming, or tuning in, scrolling endlessly through social media, or maybe sometimes too much dependence on like AI and ChatGPT to get them through the day, because
Mhm.
maybe they're so exhausted with the weight and stress or pressure of everything else going on relationally, and on their conception journey to build a family. Um, I think about just the way that men often distract themselves and bury themselves into work. And maybe if they're not getting the wins at home with their partner or with pregnancy or postpartum, maybe then they try to go get their wins at work.
Mm.
So I oftentimes may have to subtly, kind of patiently let my clients, go on about whatever they want to lead the way with talking during session, and then, therapeutically hold them, but then challenge them to say, what are we not talking about here?
Yeah,
What's underneath the
yeah.
surface? And really trying to help them turn towards the parts of them that they'd rather maybe forget, or just ignore, and the parts of their relationship that they'd rather turn away from, trying to help them find ways to turn towards it. And, uh, I think about, okay, if that's happening in the therapy session with me, I'm just thinking in bets here, like 95% sure that's happening in their partnership, in their relationship, in their marriage, where their female partner, the expecting birthing parent really needs them to turn towards. They try to put the defenses to the side and just really like open up their heart and try to have some of the hard conversations, the meaningful conversations. I think without that, a lot of times people are finding a lot more resentment between each other, and certainly maybe more irritability and more conflict, more quick to anger towards each other.
Mhm.
It becomes a back and forth kind of criticize and defend sort of cycle between couples. So I see all of that in my practice, and yeah, I really appreciate that question.
We touched upon it. Male factor infertility now accounts for now half of all infertility cases. And when men receive that diagnosis, it really impacts them. They have this profound shame. Why does infertility hit so deeply in a man's identity? And what would you wish that couples
Hmm.
understood about supporting their partner throughout this?
I mentioned a bit earlier about the attack to one's sense of manhood. So I think that's again just a emasculating kind of experience. A lot of times, especially with male factor infertility, like you had said, kind of making up about 50% of all infertility cases. Well, I think is generally like 20% for male factor only, and that kind of additional 30%, it could be both partners' factors involved. But um, with or without their partners' factors involvement in that kind of infertility challenge or fertility challenge, the male ego and psyche and you know conditioning, as much as it's been built up to be so strong, and as much as it's been built up to be sort of impenetrable and against you know uh, any kind of attack, there's guarded armor, yes, but underneath that is a very sensitive sense of self, and which I think you just think about like our own sort of development over time. Like we all kind of have these parts of ourself, and that child part of us stays with us throughout our entire life. And I think about how we're always, as a lot of men are, trying to prove that we're men, like man enough, and prove that we have, competence or strength, and on down the line, all these factors that are esteemed highly of men, culturally and socially. And so I think about how that attack against one's self-image, it becomes internalized as though they did something wrong, they themselves, which by all means may be. It could be. I think most often and more often than not, uh, and especially in a lot of cases where the chronic illness conditions may be a contributing factor, or it could be maybe, say, for example, something like a descended testicle in youth, or maybe like Klinefelter's, or all these sorts of like factors that are outside of their control, but they still internalize it as though they contributed to the fertility stress. And so, when maybe they have those shared dreams with their partner to conceive and to become parents, and it seems so far out of reach, they start to really like attack against themselves. And men have just as much as women like an unquiet mind, and the sort of self-deprecation, the put downs against our own self, those are very loud, noisy, very persuasive, which I think, just by extension, speaking about men generally, you look at rates of suicide and self-harm, and men have just past decades and generations been struggling. You look across the board, different factors on K through 12 achievement. GPAs are higher for female students compared to male students. You look at college admission rates over the past recent decades. You look at labor participation in the workforce, and a lot of men are struggling even financially when the pressure and economic pressures for them to provide are so much more compared to maybe their boomer fathers generation and beyond. Like, life has become challenging across the board, and especially I think for a lot of boys and men, where of course everybody, I believe, deserves compassion. But certainly, I think socially, as a society, as broader society, we need to start paying attention. I think many people are, many organizations are trying to factor in how can we give more support, compassion for our boys and men, because if we're maybe looking at give or take half of the population and they're just like under functioning and underperforming and finding uh, really, really consequential um, sort of, how do I describe this? Maybe like um, problems
Mm.
to show up and be calm, connected, confident, and especially in their relationships or in their work roles, or just socially. It's it's really sad. It's really challenging, and I think about sort of the expectations that have grown for modern fatherhood, for example, and trying to, like we said, or like I spoke out loud earlier, like be more engaged, more involved, more supportive, more hands on. Oftentimes, there's not really a roadmap
Right.
or a role model. And even Bell Hooks, the feminist author, she speaks about in her book, A Will to Change, that men really at their core want to love and be loved. Men can't change without a blueprint for change, and they need to be taught the art of loving if they are to be more of that supportive partner, that kind of equitable partner in modern day relationships, which uh, I think we have a lot of work to do.
Hmm. No doubt. When pregnancy loss occurs, understandably, most of the attention goes to the mother. But what does grief look like for the father?
Mm.
And sometimes it's even overlooked.
I think it looks like a lot of tears cried in the shower,
Mm.
and maybe a little bit of screaming in the car park or the elevator when it closes, or a lot of that kind of emotional outburst or expression in private,
Mm-hmm.
where on the outside, the functional father, the functional man, as I mentioned earlier, maybe he's had his losses personally, so he tries to go get his wins professionally. So he might be trying to overcompensate for that loss in the workplace by getting more deals done and more sales, or spending more work hours so he doesn't have to be around his grieving partner at home, when naturally, of course, maybe that a mother who was expecting, or the unexpecting mother, had suffered
Mm-hmm.
and maybe also felt disenfranchised of their grief, like they couldn't socially express or get their grief validated. And so who do they have left to grieve with in partnership? It's their partner. And when maybe that unexpecting father is avoiding his partner and maybe working more often, or again, some of those process addictions, just kind of escaping and self-soothing in isolation or in private. uh Looping into the question you asked a bit earlier, like how does that show up relationally? Like, there is a lot of distance created because of perinatal loss or because of grief, reproductive grief. And so when again, getting back to the four pillars of connection, when people in partnership are not openly, authentically understanding each other and looking through each other's window, having empathy and accepting and validating those emotional experiences they have, then people are not close and connected. They are distant. And there is, again, a lot of resentment that builds, um, a lot of conflict that comes from that. So in in my work, I see a lot of men showing up saying, I don't need therapy. I'm here for my partner. I'll do anything I can for my partner. Just tell me what I have to do. Which again, like kind of a sidebar, is like, you know, the female exhaustion, because uh so many men are asking their female partners, like, I'll pack the bag. Just tell me what goes in it, or I'll do the grocery shop. Just tell me, give me a list. And like, that is the mental load. That is the work of relationship and organizing and managing a household or a family life, and, a marital uh, burden often taken on by default by women and female partners. So I see a lot of men coming in needing that guidance, trying to support their partner, which of course is part of their conditioning, I think. And then really just finding out that they can probably do a lot more for their partner by turning the microscope inward and doing, taking responsibility to do that internal work for themselves. And so I think it's hard for a lot of men to demand respect when you're not doing the work.
Mm.
So that's part of my experience in trying to help men understand that, the pain, the hurt, the suffering, all of that, like, of course that's there. But it doesn't have to be something that gets in the way of you and your marriage, you and your relationship. It can be something that maybe actually, hopefully, may bring some light, some stability, and some ground to stand on through your partnership, and something to grow together, where, of course, there's ideas around post-traumatic stress, and then hopefully maybe finding some way of not moving on, but moving forward in partnership and towards some kind of rehabilitation or recovery, and some kind of growth, which I think, starting in one place, especially in the immediate aftermath of a loss, that could take months to get to a point in time where people are more open, more vulnerable, more attuned, and more connected. But certainly, it's a lot of mountains to move, but worth moving them as best we can. And if we have to be the grasshopper and kind of adopt the pace of nature, then you slow things down and you pump the brakes, and maybe with smooth water, you get to where you want to go a bit more quickly when you can slow things down, go slow. Sort of the idea, like, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of micro moments in between. So, trying to understand how a male partner showing up with grief, what you see on the surface, like I say, it may be quite complicated.
You've worked extensively with new dads. What is the biggest emotional adjustment that catches most men by surprise after becoming fathers?
I think when they come to realize that it's much harder than they expected. Uh, there's so many great women who are writing and producing content on social media and publishing books around honest motherhood, for example. Like Libby Ward, for example, has a great new book that's come out earlier this year. Lucy Jones, her book on matrescence and childbirth and pregnancy, or child rearing. We've got the title mixed up there, but these are just two authors that stick out loud to me right now. And so I'm thinking around, like, Eve Rodsky and her book Fair Play, and sort of the experience that a lot of women in early motherhood have, where they're the default parent, they're the default caregiver, the one who's responsible for round the clock care of an infant. And maybe, for example, nobody's checking in on her, but more or less checking in on baby. Of course, we spoke out loud earlier. It's not a zero-sum game, and a lot of men are not being checked in on, asked how they're doing. But I think what's happening most often is a lot of parents are struggling because maybe no one's really sat them down and helped them understand, like, this is one of the hardest experiences or chapters or episodes of emotional, relational, physical labor that you'll ever have in your whole life. And when, especially a lot of new dads, they come to me and they're finding out that, uh, they're having a really hard time struggling with a crying baby that they can't soothe, or, the baby's fighting and working against the nap schedule, or going down overnight, or the feeding schedule, and they're not, uh, doing the things that maybe they as a parent are hoping them to do, or maybe they have some developmental delay or milestones that they're not yet achieving, or especially maybe like thinking about NICU parents, for example, nobody really prepares you for birth trauma or maybe, a 2-month NICU stay. And so like you're going through all these zigzags when you plan for a straight line. And then you start to realize like, man, this is so hard. I thought it would be so much more enjoyable, so much more pleasurable. It's really a kick in the gut, like it'll punch you and chew you up and spit you out. And with sleep deprivation, of course, there's a level of that that's expected typically. Um, but when you are feeling depleted, when your partner is depleted of all these sorts of energies that you need, and tensions are high, and even the pierce screaming is just triggering you into irritable frustration, and you just can't handle it any longer. Like those are real experiences that a lot of men aren't prepared for. And I think in general, if I could tell anybody, I'd say, as Postpartum Support International, they have the mantra like you are not alone. Certainly I try to normalize all this stuff and validate everyone's experience when they're working with me, and trying to help them understand, like, in a sense, like join the club. And like a yes, and like, yes, it's hard. And there's supports, there's resources, there's ways of trying to monitor and modify what you're doing. And I like to talk about doing the therapy push-ups. You come into the therapy gym at least maybe once a week, and we're going to work it out and try to find ways to show up, and to show up in a way that you prefer, in a way that you can accumulate like the least amount of regrets. Because certainly it's hard, it's challenging. It's also got some pockets of joy and excitement, and just the whirlwind of all kinds of emotions, like A through Z. So certainly I'd say, like, you're not alone. Um, there's support out there, and certainly a lot of growing support for moms, motherhood, dads, and fatherhood, and just parental mental health in general.
Mm. What's the difference between being physically present with your family and mindful
Mm.
and emotionally available?
Yeah, I think about screens, for example, the phone. The work that I've done with a lot of men in early fatherhood is trying to find ways for them to adjust in their work-life balance, especially maybe after they've returned back to work after taking some paternity leave of absence.
Mhm.
Coming home and answering emails, or coming home and, um, scrolling social media, or coming home and, um, sometimes maybe it's needed and useful and helpful. And I know there's a range of opinions on this, but putting the younger child maybe within the 2-year range, like the toddler, in front of a television, just so that mom or dad can get 5, 10, 15 minutes of some peace and quiet, or like, that's like their pressure release valve time. So, um, yeah, I see a lot of people, in, as you mentioned, like helping me understand that they show up physically, but maybe they end up numbing themselves emotionally, because as a defense, like they get flooded with too much emotion. And so, sometimes that might show up with, especially men in early fatherhood, new dads, trying to find their voice as a parent, and trying to find, a way to bond with their child, right? Like they may be physically present, but feel no emotional bond, especially maybe with an infant. And so they are maybe in need of some coaching, or some guidance on how to do that. I think a lot of numbing happens, a lot of avoidance. I think also a lot of withdrawal happens, where they are maybe trying to take the path of least resistance, and it could be super challenging, like Bell Hooks mentioned earlier, or that quote I mentioned, when there's no blueprint. So I think that it's really important to have as much kind of early intervention training or education as possible, and thinking about ways to try to get ahead of it as best you can. But the experience I think that a lot of men have is that they want to be present, and they want to show up, and they want to help their infant, newborn, and toddler and young kid see them as a safe haven and a secure base, to make sure that they're the ones to help them feel self-soothed, and to help them build like that kind of secure attachment bond. But it's so challenging as a parent when you're trying to teach that or transfer that to your child when you've maybe not done that work
Yeah.
for yourself, or you don't have that kind of skill set or the tools in that toolbox for regulating your own nervous system,
Right.
for example. So certainly there's, again, mountains to move, a lot of work to be done. And again, resources and support are out there. It's certainly possible. Our brain loves to be able to change over time and evolves. So, even if it's an older dog, you can teach them new tricks.
That's so true. What advice would you give to first-time dads who feel disconnected from their newborn but are afraid to admit it?
Mm. Uh, I'd say go ahead and look at the man in the glass first and
Mm.
foremost. Um, I think you can move through the years. There's a quote called "The Man in the Glass" that I'm thinking of as I speak that out loud, and like paraphrasing one part of it is like you can move through the years and get pats on the back as you pass, but you'll be uh, cheating the man in the glass if you look at him and he's not your friend, right? And so, like, you think about friendship and what sort of characteristics make up a solid friendship, right? Like, you'll be honest with your friends as best you can, and if you're honest, then you can trust your friends, and if you can be honest and trust your friends, then you can feel safe with them. And so, you think about sort of what makes up attachment bonds between people. Same, I argue, applies internally, right? So you have to be honest with yourself. You have to learn how to trust yourself. You have to try and create some of that internal safety. And if anybody's listening, or maybe the partner, and they want to give some advice, I would say to them is to, put the ego aside. Uh, you don't have to wait for a crisis, and it doesn't mean there's a problem, and it doesn't mean that you're wrong or bad or crazy because you're asking for help. And I think about maybe my dad's generation or past previous generations, like the the tendency for men seeking help and help seeking behaviors in men is the bar is so low. But it's clear with data and like the health gap, especially around life expectancy, that female uh, women are outliving a lot of men, and I believe the gap is like 7 or 8 years. And I just recently came across a book by Oliver Berkman. His title is 4,000 Weeks. And so if you think about like an average life living up to about age 80, you got about 4,000 weeks of time.
Yeah.
So again, kind of taking some of that existential philosophy, like how do you want to be living your life? Do you want regret? If no, you need to start taking ownership. You need to start, especially for your own emotions and for your own health and wellness, and get yourself to the doctor, get yourself checked out, early screening and early sort of treatments, or even that kind of preventive care. We can get ahead of things a lot sooner. And I think couples therapy stats, for example, like too many couples, they end up showing up to couples therapy like 6 to 7 to 8 years too late,
Mm.
and the divorce rates are high over these past recent
Yeah.
decades.
Yeah.
Um,
It's crazy.
So, all the data is clear.
Yeah.
The facts are clear that, especially men, we've been underperforming, underfunctioning, and under uh, showing up for ourselves to take care of ourselves. When really, like again, uh, the oxygen mask sort of idea in plane travel, right? Like you put on your own oxygen mask first. You sip your orange juice. You serve water to others, right? Like you got to take care of yourself. And so, um, yeah, you're not less of a man because you're feeling some human emotions.
If a man listening today is struggling with infertility, parenthood, fatherhood, or even grieving a loss, or silently carrying this huge emotional pain, what would you hope for him to hear right now?
Mm. There's more therapists like me. So say for example, I get a lot of therapists for moms and new motherhood saying like, oh, like it's so great, like your services and support, it's so needed. And the really good thing is that there are a lot of therapists out there with really good training. And, we're obviously in need, I think, of a kind of a healthcare revolution to be able to increase access to care. But, I'm a therapist, so it might sound kind of funny to hear me say this. Like, I'm a big fan of therapy. If I could, I would have all my loved ones and people I've ever met and cared about in my life to have their own therapist. So I think getting yourself into therapy, like it doesn't mean that there's a crisis or a problem or again that you're wrong, bad, or crazy. But you need that time and space for yourself. It's such a special, like unique and meaningful opportunity to have someone sit and listen with and work with you 100% focused on you. We don't get that anywhere else in the day to day. I mean, outside this building, you step outside, you're walking around Midtown Manhattan and nobody looks at you, right? That is an experience so many people have where they're moving through their day
Yeah,
and everybody's got a story.
yeah,
Everybody's got a heart.
yeah,
So you put your hand on your chest, and as long as you got a heartbeat, you got that reason to live. And you get one shot to live. It's kind of that YOLO idea. The fact of our existence depends on you taking care of yourself. So, there's many ways to do that. Therapy is just but one of them, but certainly, like I said, the data, all the evidence, it points to men needing to take better care of themselves. And I think culturally, socially, we just need to, again, show up, do the heavy lifting, even if that means we're maybe kind of putting the upfront cost when we think it should be the other way around of men doing more of that work. Of course, they need to be involved, but maybe sometimes we need to help them slow down, see sort of the capital T truth that they need to take care of themselves.
yeah. Ready for some rapid fire?
Let's do it.
One word you wish every dad would remove from his vocabulary.
Can I give 3 words?
Of course.
Maybe there's a few words. Just tell me how to do it. All right. I spoke earlier about men wanting their wives to just tell me what to do, tell me how to do it. I think of course you need to maybe do the work yourself a little bit sometimes and learn and take the initiative and I think especially get curious.
Yes,
You
so
know?
good.
Yeah.
What's one daily habit that can dramatically improve a father's mental health?
I love what I've come to understand is called like the black box activity. Taking an index card, or like a little stack of index cards, get a shoebox, and 5 minutes every day, end of the day, write down one flaw or one error and one
Mm,
success.
love
So
it.
you give yourself 5, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes at most. I would do this as a therapist. So I would finish my day of sessions and I would sit and reflect and I'd write one error and one success on the index card. I'd fold it up and I'd put it in the shoebox. And I'd put a date in the calendar, maybe 3 months down the road. And I'd spreadsheet my errors, log my successes, and I'd try and find and spot a pattern. Are there any themes showing up here? So then as a therapist, I would go get more training or consultation, or I would get more, books on the subject and I would try to make some changes. But the benefit in doing that, if you're doing it over maybe 2 months or 3 months, 2 weeks, however much time, each and every night before you go to bed, you're reflecting on what happened during the day. So there's some mindful activity there. And I think, being able to have some maybe soothing music playing or some grounding techniques or deep breathing at the same time, like that's a way of allowing yourself to each and every day wake up knowing what you did maybe as a mistake or error the day before. And it gives you that daily opportunity to correct or, modify something to improve maybe 1%, 5%, or 10% better each and every day.
Therapy stigma among men. getting better or worse?
I think that depends on who you ask. I think there is no shortage of negativity in our world and all around us. And we see that especially with kind of the more recent decade or decades of attention on the manosphere and sort of the hyper masculinity forms and versions of masculinity and how they are, encouraging more of that self-sufficiency, which of course, by all means, like that can be a redeemable and useful quality and trait for a person. But, there is a really big need to support our boys and men, because if we're not, then there's so many bad actors out there who will.
Mm.
And so there's a lot of people doing a lot of really great work on trying to crush stigma, trying to combat, trying to fight back against it. I think it's going to be a forever process and
Mhm.
a journey, because so much of the sort of man box rules and expectations and norms, they're just so deeply embedded and ingrained in our DNA, and it's generational trauma that are, that's having a severe impact, not just on boys and men, but girls and women and just our society in general. So we've always got a lot of work to do. But if we're not going to take on that fight, who will? So we should. And, I think it's generally getting better generation by generation as far as what I can tell. But, we're not going to stop.
What's one book every father should read?
Hmm. There's a book just published yesterday, or I should say, day before yesterday. It's written by a clinical psychologist out of USC. Her name is Darby Saxby. The book's called Dad Brain, the new science of fatherhood and how it impacts men's lives. So she had a fatherhood research lab and was able to measure dad brains. She wanted to do, neurological research on women in pregnancy, but found that there was maybe too many risks involved. And so she ended up turning her attention towards fathers and dads. But she's got a lot of great research coming out in that book. That's, like I said, just published 2 days ago. That's such an important book and timely publication for Men's Mental Health Month and Father's Day right around the corner. So certainly Dad Brain is one. If I can get away and say another one, especially around parental mental health and factoring in fathers, that's the name of the title. It's the one author and psychologist I mentioned a bit earlier, Dan Singley. It's written in partnership with Jane Honickman, who is the founder of Postpartum Support International. And that book, short and sweet, thin book, really helps make the case for taking a whole family approach in perinatal care, and gives some really good tips and guidance in how to move forward that call to action, trying to get more men into therapy around that early fatherhood transition and trying to make sure that there's supports available for them. So those two books are really, really important. Um, I think you asked for one, so I gave two.
That's fine. This podcast is based on dismantling limiting beliefs.
Mhm.
What's one limiting belief you had to unlearn?
I think of how much I've wanted to control everything around me and how painful it was, but how important it was to learn and kind of reframe, or like you say, deconstruct the belief that I can't control everything. So letting go of control, obviously like relative to the situation and the circumstances, but try to control the controllables. You can't control everything. There's a lot of stuff that's in our circle of concern, of course, and it impacts us, and we have to find ways to accept all of that. You can't change it, but certainly, like if you're going to thrive in uncertainty, and you're having a hard time, you just try to narrow your focus and pay attention to the intention of controlling the controllables and let go of control where you can't control anything.
I appreciate that level of honesty. So, share with us, what does self care realistically look like for you right now?
Yeah, well, right now, as a qualifier, is a important part to the way I'll answer this is I recently just got myself back into working with my own individual therapist.
Mm,
So it's very
good for
important
you.
to me. I've been lacking that for about the better part of the past year and a half or so.
Mhm.
My family and I, my wife and I moved our two boys. We had been spending 4 years living in Baltimore, Maryland area. I had a great therapist there, but ended up moving to New Jersey and took a bit of time to settle and probably could have used a bit more therapy along the way the past 2 years. But I value so much as a therapist and provider to have my own individual personal therapy. That's really important. I think certainly trying to not burn the candle at both ends, right? Like as a parent, like it's often pressurized in the typical day. So where do you find time to squeeze in for yourself? Like there's a lot of late nights working for a lot of people. Scrolling social media almost is like some revenge scrolling and taking time for yourself. So I've tried very much to keep like that work life balance
Mhm.
as best I can. Try and make sure that I'm not overworking myself or not getting enough sleep. Um, I very much also value my closest friendships and staying connected as much as I can. Getting out and about and moving my body and chasing after little kids as much as I have to. Like it's certainly important to have your own sort of opportunity to be taking care of yourself and these sorts of things. I'm not certainly an imperfect human, and there's maybe some seasons where it's easier and more productive or effective in those areas, but yeah, I can't stress enough how important it is to find your own therapist and to be doing that work even if there's no real, like I said, crisis, a clear problem. Therapy is for everybody, and America needs therapy. The whole world, right? Like we all could benefit from that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So, Matthew, share with our listeners where they can connect with you and your preferred social media.
I appreciate that. At Verve Psychotherapy, the name of my practice is Verve Psychotherapy. That's V as in Victor. So VERVE Psychotherapy. Website is the same, www.vervepsychotherapy.com. I am looking forward to speaking for the Nurturing Mamas Network
Mm.
Perinatal Mental Health Conference this summer, and that'll be in August in Dallas, Texas. If people want to come see me or come learn with me and all the other great presenters, there's a few breakout sessions focused on infertility,
Mm.
focused on birth trauma, and focused on just some really important factors to consider in working with perinatal care. My presentation will just focus generally on working with dads in the perinatal period. And so that's certainly something exciting to look forward to. Also, I'll be promoting and facilitating Becoming Dad workshops. There's an in-person option where I'm able to work with new and expecting fathers in this Becoming Dad workshop in person in Westfield, New Jersey. Outside of that, there's virtual offerings as much as possible, right? Like I just need to get the butts in the seat and need people to show up and show their interest, and we'll get dates and times out there for that. But it's always depending on enrollment. I think the challenging thing with that is people are in different seasons, so not everybody's maybe ready for things, workshops like that all at the same time. But outside of that, I uh, happy to connect with people through Instagram, through LinkedIn, Facebook. It's all at Verve Psychotherapy.
I'll be sure to include all of this information in the show notes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us today.
I really appreciate you having me. Thank you, Lisa.
My pleasure.